lecture today, I prepared a lecture that would have taken precisely 45 minutes. But I will now try and accommodate it in 30 minutes because of all that I've heard is going to take place today. But let me also point out that I've been faithful to the title that the governor gave in his letter. His emphasis is on peace. But I've also added values, because the values of the society determine whether democracy can survive or not in that society. The values of the society is what provides the framework for peace. Having said that, let me start with this preamble. Your Excellency, the Governor, when your letter came, I was thrilled with the opportunity to renew contact with the Garden City. Some of my younger days were spent in 11 Bende Street and later at 45 Agri Road. So I'm a child of this industrious Garden City. I went down the memory lane, remembering my old friends, great men of this state and of this country. I remember Professor Claude Ake, NNOM, who, if he had been alive today, would have been the proper person to give this lecture. Claude and I, with two other compatriots, were decorated with NNOM the same day. I remember Francis Ella, Ignatius Kubara, Gary Clayton, Edward Kobani, Albert Badi, and Obi Wale, after whom this magnificent building is named. These were my pals, and we dreamt of the great future that awaited us all in the public affairs of our dear nation, Nigeria, then the shining hope of Africa. With Kobani and Obi Wale, one can revel in our days in student politics in the University College Ibadan. The high point being our joint activism, which procured the abrogation of the Anglo-Nigerian Defense Pact in 1961, what visions we had of a great nation, what hopes we shared of Nigerian leadership of Africa and the Black world. To the memory of these illustrious sons of Rivers State and of Nigeria, I dedicate this lecture. Your Excellency, when I received your letter, I look forward to paying you a personal tribute. Our country, Nigeria, evinces presently in some ways the atmosphere of a besieged nation. You have been loud and articulate as you have given a voice to the many voiceless amongst your compatriots. Some have attempted to compare our situation to the early days of Nazism in Germany, in the early 30s of the last century, when many professors and politicians and public men in Germany lost their voices. When the inexorable drift into authoritarianism and dictatorship took place, history had left us the record of the plaintive cry of one of the elite, a man called Niemöller, who cried out that when the dreaded Gestapo came for the socialists, he was mute, as he was not a socialist. When they came for the trade unionists, he was silent, as he was not a trade unionist. When they came for the lawyers and judges, he remained silent, as he was neither a lawyer nor a judge. Alas, finally, they came for him. There was total silence, as there was no one left to speak on his behalf. It is our hope and prayer that this fate will not befall our dear country. As our people in Abia State would say, your neighbors and brothers, Jidekiji. And because you are an Ikwere man who will understand the power of dialect in Igbo land, I will also say it the way the Abreba man will say it. Aki jijindodo, jitayike. At this point, I try to look at the idea of Nigeria. I will not bore you with that because I know that the lecture has been printed and you can read all that in the printed version. But 3 points emerges from this. First is that the idea of Nigeria was a foreign idea. It was an idea that some people made money from. Therefore, the foundation was transactional. The man Goldie, that we give a lot of credit for, before even Lugard, he bought Nigeria, or he sold Nigeria for 865,000 pounds sterling. And when Lugard came along, and he then decided to amalgamate the southern Nigeria and the northern Nigeria, the reason was because the northern section of the country was permanently in deficit, when the southern part was usually in surplus. The result, of course, was that they did not look at the details of how it will benefit the people of Nigeria. They looked at how they will profit out of Nigeria. We must remember that, because that's where our problem started. The second problem that I mentioned in that section is that our liberating fathers, I didn't say the founding fathers, because Nigeria still has to be founded, as I will show. Our liberating fathers adopted the foundation that the British had laid. Didn't look at what kind of nation they wanted to build. They did not look at what responsibilities they want to carry on behalf of the people of the country. And they did not look at the environment in which they were to build this new nation. That, shall I say, the gap is the reason why, being on the wrong foundation, we have continued to stumble. But let me also give credit to the former President Jonathan. You have actually tried to lay the foundation that has been. When you appointed the National Conference took decision on over 600 issues. Many of them were constitutional, some were administrative, and some were policy matters. But what the conference did was to tease out all those things that were constitutional, put it side by side with the 1999 Constitution, and now said, and brought a team of draftsmen who now said, okay, this is what the Constitution said. This is what the conference has said. They reconciled them in a manner in which, if it had been adopted, it would have been given us a constitution that is built on the will of the people. But we missed that opportunity. But I believe that the way Nigeria is going, sooner or later we will return to the National Conference. Let me do a quick review of the current state of Nigeria and the world. Nigeria is currently a country under siege, and its leaders and people are in denial. This is coming at a point in global history when the world is in a flux. New technological forces, often disruptive, are emerging even as the old forces are either in retreat or vanishing. Who can decipher the future in Nigeria or the world? We are at the stage where most nations are in dynamic equilibrium, where change is the order of the day. The rules of linear progression in social and economic evolution have given way to a situation where interactive forces act as interconnected matrices, and technology has amplified all interactive tendencies. A new world is emerging in which China is on the ascendancy, despite issues as to how the emerging new forces in the political system will implode or explode. In all this, where is Africa and where is Nigeria? If Nigeria had raised its game to the point of global recognition as we tried in 2010 or as we hoped in 2020, it would have been expected that Nigeria would aggregate the salient and relevant forces in Africa to fit Africa into the emerging global template. What is clear, however, is that the world has gone from the bipolar world of the period soon after the Second World War, involving Russia and the United States. The illusory unipolar world, dominated now by America, is giving way to a new multipolar world in which Nigeria should have shaped and dominated the African pool. Alas, the indications are not favorable that the capacity for this exists in the current Nigerian situation. On the economic front, which is now the measure of a nation's capacity instead of the old military power matrix, as the index of measurement, we have regressed on all fronts. We have regressed on all fronts. We are now globally the poorest nation. We have to borrow to fund our recurrent budget. Indeed, our debts are at an all-time high. The Debt Management Office just 3 weeks ago said that we owe over 24 trillion. It is claimed that the records show that we have borrowed in the last 3 years more than we borrowed in the preceding 30 years. What is more, the Gini coefficient, which is a measure of the gap between the lowest earners and the highest earners, is at an all-time high. In other words, the poor are getting poorer as the rich are getting richer. The level of inequality portends a social upheaval of such magnitude that can only be unprecedented. Additionally, unemployment has continued to grow, even as inflation has started to rise again. It is an open question whether we are sliding into another recession. The situation, in my view, could be depressing. All current indications suggest that we are well into the new age of recurring violence. When the Masine group came, we crushed it under the carpet. When the Boko Haram came, we dilly-dallied and morphed into the dangerous cancer that it has become. And now it has linked up with the Islamic State of West Africa, thus locking us into the new global infrastructure of violence and terrorism. Add to the brew the new phenomenon of rampaging Fulani herdsmen, which is alleged are now ensconced into all the isolated and remote forests of all the states of southern Nigeria and the Middle Belt. Thus, the instruments of violence are primed, ready to swing into action any moment at their convenience. As if that is enough, we now have banditry and unrestrained armed robbery, kidnapping, and cultists, who constitute an ever-present danger in all states of this nation. It is now difficult to differentiate between friends and foes. In all this, our capacity to fight back has been constrained by the division of the Fulani camp between those who are committed to their vision since the 19th century of a virtual Fulani empire spanning West and Central Africa, and those committed to build with other Nigerian compatriots a new Nigerian nation that is capable of leading Africa and the world of the 21st century. Which way will the pendulum swing? Two factors constrain us in any effort to judge accurately the future: the unabashed northernization of the security services that we have seen in the last few years, and the confusion and incoherence of the political leadership across party lines. We are truly in the joys of a dilemma laced with the trimmings of a double jeopardy. Let us look briefly to the democratic ideal and the various democratic models. But I will not spend time on this because since the lecture will be published, you will be able to read it, the arguments, why democracy is important, why it is the basis on which you can build the peace that will please our Governor Wike, and more importantly, why it is the basis in which you can develop the society. And I went on to look very closely at what China has done. And I looked at the concept of liberal democracy because it is in that concept that we, the people, is critical. And the people here must encompass all citizens, regardless of religion, culture, and length of citizenship. It is to be noted that the rising tide of populism is a threat to liberal democracies anchored on the concept of we the people, for it is the enemy of pluralism. People need to live as free, equal, and unavoidably diverse citizens. The protection of pluralism is vital because people are not uniformly virtuous. Hence, political systems anchored on the virtues of the people soon come to grief, such that populists, in their disappointment, often embark on a fruitless search for the enemies of the people. In that search, they are always telling us, in moralistic terms, that the enemies of the people are corrupt, that the enemies of the people are self-seeking, that the enemies of the people are always embarking on conspiracies against the people. When that starts happening in a society, take care. This often leads to authoritarianism, and when in full bloom, breeds dictatorship. There are several models of democratic and federal systems, but each nation works out the details to suit its peculiar history and environment. And I spent some time looking at the social and cultural environment in Nigeria and why it's important, and then looking in detail at the example of China. And I think, let me just say this about China. China emerged from communism into a market-driven collegiate autocracy. This involved tight control by the Communist Party, anchored on a relentless effort to recruit talented people to the upper ranks of its leadership. In economic and social terms, it has produced greater dividends for its people than the liberal democratic model. In the political leadership changes every 10 years, with a younger leadership, more talented cadre taking over. While the United States, during its period of ascendancy to global leadership, doubled the indices of its living standards every 30 years, China has achieved the same landmark every 10 years. We must note that China is an extremely disciplined society. The question can be raised as to the lesson that the Chinese can teach Nigeria. The most important lesson is that which I hinted at earlier. Governance systems that shape the economic system must emerge organically from the historical and environmental experience of a given people, garnished by global lessons and anchored on the vision of its leadership. The emphasis must always rest on the individual within a framework of relentless drive for education, nurtured by productivity. As the liberal democratic model also taught us, we must institute as an imperative checks and balances and the necessary firewalls to constrain tyranny and authoritarianism, especially in a fledgling democracy as in Nigeria. From there, I went on to look at the practice of democracy in Nigeria, pointed out some of the paradoxes, and pointed out some of the contradictions. So, Mr. Chairman, allowed me to read what I had to say on this a bit more fully. Ever since the colonial days, the practice of democracy has been a sad tale of manipulation and other shenanigans. This year, 2019, the international observers of our recent elections have documented the electoral infractions in their reports. It would seem that in 2019, we reached a new low in undermining the electoral process, which is the hallmark for democracy. The core idea of democracy, as we saw earlier, is the sovereignty of the people. Representative democracy is to capture the will of the people through their representatives. Unfortunately, the aspect of democracy that we have accepted and pursued zealously is to ambush the electoral process in order to capture power, which of course implies that once we have that ability to wield force, we also wield authority and influence without let or hindrance. The question which naturally arises is, for what purpose? What do we take power for? In a representative democracy, the people surrender of their sovereign power to their representative presume that it's for the good of the people. In other words, service of the people must be the primary motivation for seeking power and ultimately for governance. It also presumes that the representative is the embodiment of the confidence and trust of the people. Hence, it is expected that those who are the beneficiaries of the people's mandate, trust and confidence, will possess a track record of credibility and hence integrity. As it has been said, truth is the foundation of trust, and trust is the capstone of integrity. There is therefore a moral dimension to the covenant that governs the relationship of the people and their representatives, founded on the society's value system and the ethical principles that sustains the value system. When the motivation for the relationship is transactional, as I pointed out earlier, rather than covenantal, the moral basis for the authority and power of the representative is irredeemably undermined. There is then the paradox that roles are reversed between the people and their representative. The representative, the servant of the people, now wields the whip hand. He is now the master leader instead of the servant leader. Thus, we observe the outward show of the process of democracy, but not the spirit. This fundamental breach in the people-representative relationship creates the climate of brazen impunity in the management of the democratic process, in the party, in the legislative chambers, and in the executive that we have seen. This sets the stage for the corruption and intimidation of the judicial system. We now have at all levels people who know the cost of everything, but do not know the value of anything. This is the state of affairs that ushers the final stage of debauchery, the militarization of the electoral process, as we saw recently, particularly in Rivers State. Ultimately, this is the road to Afghanistan and to Somalia, and you can spell it in two words: utter chaos. Unfortunately, democracy is not only about elections, but democracy is about the entire panoply of institutional checks and balances founded on a willing and cooperative interplay of institutional monitors, referees. Our president just told us he returned from refereeing in South Africa. And a free press playing by the rules, derived from the society's code of values and ethical framework. In this, as in other areas of national life, there are things that are just not done and will always be unacceptable in a viable and serious society. There are times that a society is given relevance, sustainability, and moral strength by the consecration of appropriate myths and symbols with definable red lines, this far and no more. Where are the boundaries of power in present-day Nigeria? But let us look at the role that culture and development play. In this, I must emphasize the fact that there are paradigms that emerge when you practice democracy properly, as you will see when you read this, in relation to America, in relation to China. And I start by reminding us that cultural values matter as they form the principles around which economic activity is organized. And without economic activity, progress is not possible. Economic progress depends on changing the way people think about wealth. This means changing the underlying attitudes, beliefs, and assumptions that have informed the decisions made by leaders that result in poor economic performance. The way people think about business, economics, or competition, conciliation, and cooperation influences the quality of the strategic choices they make. A more highly educated workforce stimulates a higher rate of innovation. A higher rate of innovation yields the ability to sell increasingly complex goods and services and ideas. Hence, the aggregation of individual beliefs along new dimensions can generate new mental models with new features. Thus, the Differences in societies can be a function of the mental models of their leaders. Consequently, to foster economic growth or create new social capital, it is often necessary to alter fundamental mental models that the leaders operate with, which can shape the way individuals think about risk, about trust, about competition, about authority, and other critical variables in national development. Changing mental models may cause drastic shifts in the culture of a nation. Thus, leadership matters, because individuals can change the trajectory of a nation's development. We saw this in China, as between Mao Zedong's mental model and Deng Xiaoping's model, which transformed China and provided a foundation for what we see in China today. In Nigeria today, we have diverse cultures at different stages of development. Some are stuck in the 19th century, some in the 20th century, and some are primed to leapfrog to the 21st century. As China has illustrated, it is possible to leapfrog into the present 21st century if the appropriate visionary leadership is on call. That means leaders whose mental models are in tune with the present-day realities of the 21st century. The fundamental transformative changes that define present-day China took only 11 years. 11 years, China changed. Western Europe and North America went through the same transformative experience when Calvinism, a Christian ideology, was transmitted into a secular code of behavior, anchored in hard work, honesty, seriousness, thrift, and time management. A new man arose from the ashes of the new code of behavior: rational, diligent, orderly, productive, clean, and humorless, what we now call the Puritans. When the religion encouraged the appearance in numbers of this human archetype, a new personality type emerged, exceptional and adventurous, which proceeded to create a new mode of industrial capitalism. In China, the tenets of Confucianism gave the encouragement to the adherents to aim for Ren, the highest virtue in Confucianism. This encouraged the higher development of man's distinctive nature, typified by benevolence and a higher morality which cultivates compassion and love in the individual. The superior man that emerges from such environment is quiet, calm, always waiting for the appointment of heaven. In other words, always waiting for that which his destiny will direct the leader to do that will transform the society. Let me emphasize this first. What the European and Chinese models teach us is that transformation is not possible unless a paradigm shift in the cultural domain, which facilitates changes in mental models and a transformed mindset emerges. In all these examples that I've given, education and continual re-education is the key. Let us now look at the challenges of a new Nigeria. Against the background of all that has been said, it is clear that Nigeria is not working. It was not originally designed to be a democratic nation, but rather a colonial contraption that is the product of failure engineering. Tafawa Balewa, a United Nations on the 7th of October 1960, drew attention to what he referred to as intractable problems. Both Azikiwe in 1964 and Awolowo in 1967 all agreed that the dynamics of colonial interference did not permit them to lay a solid foundation for the development of democracy amenable to nation building. In other words, you can pursue what you call democracy, and it leads to no development. And both Awolowo and Azikiwe appreciate that and pointed it out. Additional constraints to the effort include a prolonged military interregnum, which paralyzed the deployment of creative individual initiative to solve the socio-political problems of the period in a civilized manner. They introduced elements of terrorism, that is the military, into the polity, and legitimized violence and brutality in the psyche of Nigerians as acceptable enforcement mechanisms. If those of you old enough to remember the days of the military, you can see people collected, citizens, and they are made to jump and jump. And it was meant to teach them a lesson. But that lesson, unfortunately, was the wrong lesson. Because to practice democracy and to pursue it for development, you must respect your people so that they can apply their initiative and move forward. A new Nigeria must therefore be built on a new foundation and redesigned to accommodate pluralism and diversity in the conduct of national business. It should now be evident that peace and progress cannot flow from a setting that was designed to produce disorder. Hence, the only rational approach is reprogramming in such a manner that can resolve systemic discord in the pursuit of peace, development, and progress. We may start by embracing the African concept of nonviolent communication, which can stem the rising tide of rancorous, violent, and vitriolic exchanges that has often stoked the fire of violence, leading to avoidable shedding of blood. His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, the visionary who turned Dubai, a desolate desert, into the thriving center of the world within a generation, has observed, and with your permission, I'll quote him. He says, when you face a challenge, that is as a leader, that demands a solution or decision, you have two choices. You can either emulate the example set by others, or use your own creativity and intelligence to formulate a new idea. We have emulated Americans by adopting the American-style presidential system without embracing the spirit that energizes it, the checks and balances that stabilizes it, or the firewalls that protect it from generation to generation. A firewall, if I may explain, is designed to prevent unauthorized access and to protect a system from abuse. The first firewall is to recognize that the operators of the new American system will not all be virtuous. So Jefferson, one of the founding fathers, admonished as follows: let no man be seized by confidence in man, but bind him down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution. Benjamin Franklin, another member of the founding fathers at the Constitutional Conference in 1887, reminded his compatriots that there are two passions which have a powerful influence in the affairs of men. These are ambitions and avarice, the love of power and the love of money. Each of these have great force in prompting men to action. But when united in view of the same object, they have in many minds the most violent effects. Place before the eyes of such men a post of honor that shall at the same time be a place of profit, and they will move heaven and earth to obtain it. That is a proper representation of what's happening in our country today. It was left to John Adams to sound a note of warning on the limitations that attend the most democratic systems. He advised his compatriots, and I quote him again, remember, democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself. There never was a democracy that did not commit suicide. It is vain to say that democracy is less vain, less proud, less selfish, less ambitious, or less avaricious than aristocracy or monarchy. The upshot of all these exchanges was American founding fathers sent themselves back to school to study the works of the Greek philosopher-statesman Polybius, namely to learn that monarchies, aristocracies, when combined with majority rule, can give rise to a unique democratic republic, where monarchs were prevented from turning into tyrants, aristocrats into oligarchs, and democratic citizens will not degenerate to mob rule. They created a system of checks and balances with a presidency, the legislature, and the judiciary as three separate arms of government which are separate but co-equal, in an environment where the rule of law and a free press thrived. It should be noted also that a thriving democracy cannot flourish in the absence of educated citizens. This is why Jefferson admonished his compatriots, and I quote him again, "If a nation expects to be ignorant and free in a state of civilization, it expects what never was and never will be." Indeed, our own Awolowo in 1980 emphasized the same point about education when he advised as follows, and I quote Awolowo, "Indeed, unless the federal government actively promotes the introduction of free education at all levels throughout the country, the gap between the South and the North, which stood at 50 years in 1960, according to Awolowo, and widened to more than 75 years in 1980, it may widen to more than 100 years in the next 10 years, which is by 1990. If we take serious steps to end that now, that is the gap in education, we will certainly succeed in reducing the gap considerably in, say, 25 years. The consequences of inaction in this matter is too gruesome for mention," unquote. We are reaping today the gruesome dividends that Awolowo predicted, which has borne fruit in Boko Haram, Fulani herdsmen, and the hordes of kidnappers, bandits, and sundry other malcontents and criminals. Despite this frightening scenario, there are mortuary schools which were established by the government. When we add to the mix the information that has not been denied by official sources of payments to Boko Haram, and more recently to the promoters of Miyetti Allah, there is cause for worry whether there is a workable strategy to deal with what we have on our national plate. Your Excellency the Governor, Your Excellency our Chairman, and past President of this nation, let me affirm that despite the horrendous picture I have painted, a new Nigeria of our responsible expectation and dreams is still possible, despite the frightening omens in the presently dark atmosphere. My confidence is founded on 4 grounds. Since evil cannot overcome the good, the days of the merchants of violence will soon end. Two, despite the occupation of sundry remote locations all over the nation, the capacity to sustain such a vast police activity by the herdsmen is not sustainable. Ultimately, the forces of peace and the good will overcome. 3, Nigeria is in the hands of God. The time is near when our God will show that He is truly the sovereign Lord of Nigeria over all His people. 4, the international environment has changed. Impunity and violence enjoys scant tolerance, especially with various international institutions that monitor the levels of world order, including the International Criminal Court of Justice at The Hague. Finally, Your Excellencies, may you continue to tread confidently in the path of peace and service to the land of our fathers. We shall overcome. Your leadership will be vindicated. I am done. I thank you all for your attention. God bless us all and our nation.